In Praise of Listening by Libby Sims. In this dissertation, I have sought to thoroughly explore the hierarchy of the senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. I have done this by exploring examples of the senses throughout history, across cultures, as well as looking at predictions for the future. I have also investigated the current pervasive dominance of sight as the primary sense and made an argument for sound as a sense of equal or at times higher value. In response to this, I have investigated the idea of soundscape and sound walking. The soundscape is the thing that I am trying to draw attention to. I am not creating it, but instead I am highlighting it and making an argument for why it is worthwhile. If the soundscape is the masterpiece, then soundwalking is the window through which we peek at it. Soundwalking is the tool that allows us to connect with the soundscape in a forum that is dedicated to listening. Of the senses. Pelasma, at a conference talk titled Touching the World, explains that though the senses are understood as singular, each of them feed into and relate to one another. Perception is not the sum of the visual, tactile, and audible givens. It is experienced in a total way, with the whole of the being, speaking to all the senses at once. Throughout the everyday, we employ our senses countless times in order to carry out a plethora of tasks, ranging from the mundane to instances of highly trained use of senses, such as the ear of a mechanic detecting problems by the sound of the engine alone. Bullenbeck, in their book, The Auditory Culture Reader, remarks that if we were to rank the senses and order their importance, it would leave sight at the top and sound at a lousy second. This has implications for all of the subordinate senses, which are often then filtered through a visualist framework, reducing our access to sensory knowledge and placing limitations on our ability to understand the meaning attached to social behaviours. Architecture of the Seven Senses by Pelasma gives us a summary of the senses in relation to space, which I will share with you now. He argues that the strongest memory of space is its smell. A familiar smell can conjure memories that were thought to be long forgotten. The tactile sense connects us with time and tradition. Through mutual touch, we shake the hands of countless generations. The eye is the sense of separation and distance, whereas touch is the sense of nearness, intimacy, and affection. In times of heightened emotion, we tend to exclude the distracting sense of vision, closing our eyes to embrace a loved one. Bullenbeck go on to lament how today's culture, which is characterized by wealth, material abundance, and technology, seems to be drifting us towards increased levels of sensory detachment and distance, isolation, and solitude. We are suppressing the senses of nearness, intimacy, and touch. The visual hegemony is feeding into a cultural condition of further alienation, abstraction, and distance. This is replacing the formerly valued experiences of belonging, a sense of rootedness, and intimacy. In his 2007 book, Listening and Voice, Don Ider explores the history of visualism, proposing that it is symptomatic of the history of thought. The use and often metaphorical development of vision can be traced through various periods and high points of intellectual history. This visualism has dominated our thinking about reality and experience, the roots of which can be seen in Greek language, which identifies seeing and knowing by a verb which means in the present appear or shine. Even the Greek word meaning to live is synonymous with to behold light. This shows that before philosophy and in the ancient past of Greek experience, the world for a long time has been one of vision. And the sentiment has carried into everyday life. When one solves a problem, he has had the required insight. There is a mind's eye. We are enlightened when informed by an answer. Even the light bulb going off in a cloud over the cartoon character's head reaffirms the linkage of thought to vision. Vision has become the root metaphor for thought, the paradigm that dominates our understanding of thinking. Though sound has had its place in history also, Ida references ancient mythologies in which the word for soul was often related to the word for breath. In the biblical myth of creation, God breathes life into Adam, and that breath is both life and word. Ida reflects that the relationship between sound and human history has more often than not been talked about as a quiet then and a noisy now. A rather different way of dividing these two eras has been to distinguish between an oral then, which was somehow more magical than the present, and the second era being the literate now, which is somehow more rational than the past. In some ways, this always also reflects the switch from ear culture, listening, and eye culture, watching and reading. At this turn, visual came to be regarded as the more comprehensive and trustworthy sense, while the oral was left with associations of passivity, superstition, and hearsay. Hildegard Westerkamp, in her 1974 journal article about sound walking, suggests that perhaps such a forum doesn't exist in nomadic tribes or rural societies. People who are already actively in touch with nature on a daily basis and their lifestyle is already in tune to the natural environment. Whereas our urban lives limit our contact with nature, it ceases to be a companion with whom one lives and struggles daily and becomes a distant friend who one may visit on occasion. Though people of the city do go for walks to regain contact with nature. However, going for a walk so often is replaced with going for a drive. Our connection with nature becomes purely visual. The two-dimensional landscapes appear on the windshield, playing to the soundtrack of a running motor and the car radio. This instance, as well as many others, creates situations where the contact that is made between the environment and the human senses is mediated by the skin or the bubble of the vehicle in which we sit. Another aspect of oral culture examined by Bull and Back is the way in which we use sound to identify and differentiate classes such as the elites, the working class, and women. Associations with each class reflected their place in society. Examples include noise being associated with the lower class. A good woman is quiet and gentle. There is an overall association with ordered noise being good and chaotic noise being bad. Lastly, sound is often associated with industriousness and productivity, following the sentiment of may your hammers be always resounding. Needless to say, none of these are blanket statements, but are indicative of the ways in which the senses, and sound specifically, are employed pervasively through many cultures to separate and identify different groups for both positive and negative reasons. Sensitivity to noise is often class and culturally based. Cultures with strong notions of private space as a form of enlightenment are more prone to complaints about noise. The production of noise is often perceived as uncivilized within a bourgeois ethic. A final example of sound and community that came up in almost all readings is the bell. Bells help to create a territorial identity for individuals living in range of its sound, as well as providing a sense of rootedness in their community. The sound of a bell conjures the notion of a place that is slow by nature, prone to conserve what lies within, and reminiscent of a time when walking was the main way of going from place to place. Moreover, in 19th century France, bells were thought to protect the community from all conceivable threats. It was a popular belief that demons were afraid of the sound of bells, and by dispelling demons from the township it also ridded it of associated plagues, floods, and storms. This also meant that the air, now free of demons, was an open passageway for the prayers of peasants to pass through heaven into the ear of God. Bells were also believed to be able to summon angels. Many writers and critics have voiced concerns that our inattention to listening may cause some of the more delicate and quiet sounds to pass by unnoticed. Writers such as Westerkamp in 1974 and Schaeffer in 1977 went further to predict a universal deafness would occur without recognition of the powerful and profound influence the soundscape can have on people. Looking at almost all the senses and their application in the future is to look at advances in technology in order to optimize our existing sensory intake via technologies such as hearing aids. This is indicative of the increasingly integrated role of personal technology in our daily lives, connecting us with others, as well as mediating our own interaction with the world we live in. Another popular exploit of technology is to create convincing experiences of virtual reality. Currently, virtual reality is used predominantly for gaming, though Forbes lists education, design, and healthcare as three of the industries likely to employ and benefit from virtual reality in the future. To predict the value we might place on our senses in the future is a far more uncertain task. It is the hope that all senses will be appreciated fully for the experience they have to offer, as well as the value of a full sensory experience to be understood and appreciated. However, such a dream seems optimistic. Of sound. In his RMIT thesis, Tout looks at the development of technology for recording, which has increased and spread following the industrialization. As technology spread, so did each individual's possibilities to interact with and record the soundscape around them. Prior to the 20th century, because the technology wasn't available, the listener was limited to their own fleeting experience. This is called direct listening, and refers to an experience where the creator of the sound is visible and present. Nowadays, if one feels like listening to Elvis, for example, the only way one can do that is by listening to one of his albums, as he is dead. Most of our listening is now done this way, and has been coined by Schaeffer acousmatic. This is where the cause of the sound is invisible. Bull and Back, in their chapter The Sonic Composition of the City, discussed the role of the iPod and other similar technologies. Walkmans and iPods are the iconic urban technology of privatization, permitting users to construct their own individual sound worlds wherever they go. Experience is aestheticized, and the world becomes what the user wants it to be. Sound manages the user's mood, feelings, and sense of time and space. Moreover, mobile phones provide the sounds of intimacy wherever the user may be. Sound transforms public spaces into private property, fostering an attitude of home is where my sounds are. Sound is at once the most forceful stimulus and the most evanescent. Sound can be visceral and felt in the body at the same time, rapidly dissipating into nothing. It is a thought that all sounds still exist, travelling out somewhere in the great blue yonder. Andrew Sink goes on to explain that our experience of sound bridges the near and far. We feel sound as we hear it. Sound touches us in an intimate way. Sound has a strongly tactile aspect, particularly with lower frequencies, which we feel as much as we hear. The soundscape and sound walking. The oral environment or soundscape are terms used throughout the text and literature to describe the sonic properties which a physical environment or space exhibits. This term is understood and used differently from each person. Schaeffer defines the soundscape as the sonic environment, technically any portion of the sonic environment regarded as a field for study. The term may refer to actual environments or to abstract constructions such as musical compositions and tape montages, particularly when considered as an environment. Schaeffer, credited with inventing the term soundscape, argues that it is as deserving of our attention as that of a landscape, and that it has been ignored for far too long. Tout explains soundscape as a description of events that are heard and not seen. Blesser and Salter, in their article The Other Half of the Soundscape, use a food analogy. Sonic events are like raw ingredients. Oral architecture is the cooking style, and as an inseparable blend of both, the soundscape is the resulting meal. Soundscapes are alive with the life that is creating it. Hendy, a BBC radio host and a historian, in his book Noise, A Human History of Sound and Listening, also compares the soundscape to a landscape, comparatively saying, a soundscape is simultaneously a physical environment and a way of perceiving that environment. It is both a world and a culture constructed to make sense of that world. Hildegard Westerkamp defines the sound walk as any excursion, the main purpose of which is listening to the environment. Wherever the listeners go, they give their ears priority. Their aim is to expose the ears to every sound that is around them and let them perform their natural function. Soundwalks have all sorts of immediate benefits, bringing attention to and revealing unique details in the soundscape. It also has meditative qualities and allows the walker to be present in the moment. Not only does it heighten the sense of hearing, but all the other senses also. Soundwalks can be done alone, with a friend, in a small or large group. It can cover a large area or a focused space. It is encouraged to walk in silence and turn off mobile phones during a sound walk. My process. One of the requirements of this project was an application of research, resulting in an outcome. It took me a long time to understand what this might mean for me. I was just curious about sound and wanted to share my curiosity and the joy I had found as a result. Upon researching shared experience of sound, soundwalking became a clear choice as a forum for introducing a new attitude towards sound. I decided to compound this with a focus group in order to gather information about the participants' experience, as well as overall personal listening habits, in a format that was also group-based and continued the spirit of group experience and open discussion. For my primary sound walk, I chose a walk around campus as it is a common area for most of the people who would be interacting with my work. It is also convenient as it uses the Polytech as the start and end point. The sense of closeness and familiarity also reinforces the idea that this is about an attitude that can be applied anywhere, not one specific magical location. In my proposal, I also promised to deliver 2 to 3 additional soundwalk maps of other routes. These are walks composed and mapped by myself. This will create self-guided soundwalks for participants that they can do as an individual or as a group. The locations that I have chose for these are the Dunedin Botanic Gardens and George Street. My primary soundwalk and focus group took place mid-October and had 6 participants. It was a cloudy day and it was drizzling ever so slightly. We set out regardless. The walk was filled with the sounds of campus. The main sentiment that rang out in the group, which I found surprising and delightful, was that each of the participants remarked on the meditative, calming, or therapeutic value of the exercise. The process of active listening, allowing the listener to be present in the moment, and as a result not be thinking of the past or of the future. One participant explained it as the following. I think that your brain's normally filled with your thoughts, or a song stuck in your head, and the outside noise is kind of filtered out. Instead, the outside noise sort of filled that empty space and stopped all the thoughts or thought patterns, and instead there was just what was going on around me. This was excellent feedback to hear because firstly it meant that the participants had a positive and enjoyable experience, which is the ultimate goal of this work. Secondly, it proved to be consistent with the claims of theorists such as Westerkamp, As a researcher, I was cynical that such effects on well-being were over-exaggerated or only achieved by few after years of practice. It was so encouraging that the first time soundwalkers had this experience and this response. Sustainability. As a part of our course, it is obligatory that our projects relate to and integrate ideas and values of sustainability. At first I found it hard to think about this in relation to sound, understanding sustainability simply as waste, the conservation of a physical environment, and massive breaches in human rights or matters of ethical production. I'm just one person asking people to listen. I thought myself to have no effect on sustainability, although reading more I discovered that my very motivations are somewhat rooted in sustainability. Asking why we do things the way we do, and seeking meaningful connections with the world we live in. By appreciating and interacting with our environment, we find more value and are reminded of old reasons we love and should look after our world, conserving and appreciating all soundscapes. This attitude towards listening and being in tune to the environment also has benefits for our own personal well-being, as well as encouraging exercise and building connections with the places we dwell, either as individuals or groups. Conclusion. In conclusion, it is clear that the sense of sound and the skill of listening are not fully appreciated in today's time or culture, and that visual primacy has had pervasive effects on the way we think, live, share, and experience. Throughout history, there have been highs and lows for each of the different senses, the value placed on the senses at any given time being highly influenced by the surrounding culture. It is not likely that humanity will ever reach a perfect balance of the senses, and neither is it likely that that would be a good thing. Instead, it will be a conversation that flows on forever with each sense jostling for top spot, human curiosity and innovation driving the promotion and expansion of our sensory knowledge. It has been the goal of this work to comprehensively understand the senses and offer a good argument for listening. Through my writing, the creation of sound walks, and the feedback from the focus group, I would say that the goal has been achieved. The perspective of at least 6 participants were changed, and I am hoping that having read this far, you the listeners' own thoughts have been challenged. I feel it is foolish to predict the future of listening, but it is my hope that it is a bright one. Not for my own selfish indulgence, but for everyone, so they can enjoy something so fundamental to their being that has become so detached and filtered through the pervasive technologies of modern culture.